It was a regular afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow on the street as kids and teenagers hung out, looking for something to do. Among them was a group of teens, the kind who spent most of their time picking on others. Today their target was an elderly man who was making his way down the sidewalk at a slow, steady pace. The man was a bit bent over, his steps deliberate and careful, but there was something about him that caught the attention of the teens. He was old, and his black skin seemed to reflect the wisdom of years lived through. His hair was completely white now, and his face was covered in wrinkles that told stories of a long life. He didn't look like someone who would draw any kind of attention, but the group of teens saw him as an easy target. The teens, loud and confident, started laughing when they spotted him. They were bored, and picking on the old man seemed like harmless fun to them. As they approached, one of the boys, the loudest in the group, shouted out a taunt. "Hey, old man, you lost. Shouldn't you be in a retirement home somewhere?" He laughed, looking around for the approval of his friends. The other teens snickered and added their own comments, each trying to outdo the other with insults. "Maybe he needs help crossing the street," another teen chimed in, smirking as they surrounded him. "Oh wait, can't even walk straight." They began to push the old man, shoving him lightly and mocking his every movement. But the old man didn't react. He simply continued walking, keeping his head straight, not even looking at the group. His calmness only seemed to fuel the teens' amusement. "Look at this guy. He's a real tough guy, huh?" one of the teens mocked, nudging another. But there was something strange about the way the old man moved. He didn't seem frail at all. His steps, though slow, were steady and purposeful, as if he wasn't affected by the mocking words. It was as though he didn't even hear them. His eyes, though lined with age, had a sharpness to them, like someone who had seen much of the world and learned from it. The group couldn't understand why the old man wasn't reacting. In their minds, he should have been scared, should have stood there and let them laugh at him. But instead, the old man moved with quiet dignity, showing no sign of fear or anger. It made them uncomfortable, even though they would never admit it out loud. One of the teens, feeling the need to prove himself, stepped up and pushed the old man a little harder than before. "What's wrong, old man? You too weak to fight back?" he said, expecting the elderly man to fall or show some sort of reaction. Instead, the old man didn't stumble or fall. He simply straightened up a little more, almost as if he was preparing for something, and continued to walk. The teens exchanged confused glances. The air around them seemed to change, as if a quiet tension was building. They didn't know it yet, but this old man wasn't the weak target they had thought him to be. He wasn't afraid, he wasn't angry, and most importantly, he wasn't about to let them get away with their childish cruelty. They might have seen him as a frail old man, but in reality, he was something much more. The group didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn a valuable lesson. The old man wasn't someone they could push around. He was about to show them that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most quiet and unassuming people carry the strongest power of all. As the old man continued to walk, the group of teens grew more and more agitated. They couldn't understand why he wasn't responding. He wasn't angry, he wasn't flustered, and he definitely wasn't scared. To them, it felt like their teasing was falling flat, like they were missing some reaction they were used to getting from others. They had picked on plenty of people before, and most of the time, their targets would either walk away, argue, or show some kind of emotion. But the old man was different. One of the teens, frustrated by the lack of reaction, stepped up to him and pushed him again, a little harder this time. The others watched eagerly, waiting for the old man to either fall or react. But again, the elderly man simply stood firm. His posture was steady, his face calm, as if nothing had happened. There was a brief moment of silence, where the group exchanged uneasy glances. They expected some kind of outburst, a word, a shout, or maybe even a little stumbling. But none of that came. A few more taunts came from the group, but the old man didn't flinch. It was almost as if they weren't even there. The more the teens pushed, the more they began to feel an odd discomfort. They were used to getting their way, used to seeing fear or anger in their targets. But this was different. The old man seemed so unaffected. "What's wrong with you, old man?" one of the teens finally asked, his voice dropping a little. "Are you too tired to talk back or something?" He was trying to provoke a response, anything that would break the strange calm the old man held. But still, the elderly man said nothing. At this point, a few of the teens were starting to feel awkward. They hadn't expected their jokes to go on for this long without the old man giving in. Some of them were starting to wonder if they should just walk away. It wasn't fun anymore. They had no idea how much longer they could keep this going. But there was one teen, the leader of the group, who wasn't ready to back down just yet. He wasn't about to lose face in front of the others. "Maybe he's just too slow to do anything," the leader muttered, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Poor guy can't even stand up for himself." The others chuckled, but there was something in the air that made them pause. They were starting to notice something strange in the old man's movements. He wasn't as weak as they had thought. The old man's gait, though slow, was measured. He wasn't walking in a haphazard, stumbling way. His steps were deliberate, each one taken with care. His hands were resting loosely by his sides, but the way they moved suggested something more than mere weakness. Something about his presence was strong, even though he didn't show it in the way the teens expected. Still, the group couldn't figure out why the old man wasn't reacting the way they wanted. Why wasn't he angry? Why wasn't he scared? It was almost like he was waiting for something, but the teens didn't know what. The longer this strange encounter went on, the more they started to feel that there was something not quite right. Some of the teens began to second-guess their actions, unsure of whether they should continue to push him or just leave him alone. They had gone too far, but their leader was still determined to make something happen. After all, he couldn't back down now. The others were waiting for him to do something. But the old man didn't react. He just kept walking. And the teens couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in, something they had never expected. The old man wasn't just a frail, harmless senior citizen. There was something deeper to him, something they would soon learn the hard way. The longer the teens watched the old man, the more their curiosity grew. They had never come across someone like him before. The man wasn't like the usual targets they picked on. Most people, when pushed around or taunted, would show some kind of reaction. Fear, anger, embarrassment. But not him. He remained completely calm, his eyes focused ahead, and his movements never faltering. The group started to feel a sense of unease, but they couldn't quite understand why. One of the teens, a girl who had been standing on the sidelines, was starting to feel guilty. She wasn't the one pushing the man, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were going too far. She had seen the way the old man carried himself. There was something dignified about him, something that made her uncomfortable with the way they were treating him. She had a gut feeling that maybe they had picked the wrong person to mess with, but she kept her thoughts to herself, not wanting to stand out. The group's leader, however, was getting impatient. He had spent so much time trying to provoke the old man, and now that he was getting nothing, he was starting to feel frustrated. He had always been the one to have the upper hand, to get people to react the way he wanted, but this was different. The silence was starting to get to him, like the calm before a storm. He felt the pressure building and had no idea why. "Why don't you just go away already?" he called out, his voice slightly harsher than before. "Why do you have to make this so weird?" He was trying to get a reaction out of the man, but there was still nothing. It was like the old man was ignoring them on purpose. One of the other teens glanced at the leader nervously. "Maybe we should just leave him alone. He's not doing anything." But the leader wasn't ready to back down yet. He had already made it this far, and in his mind, there was no way he was going to let the old man have the last word. He wasn't about to show weakness, not in front of his friends. "No, we'll just keep going," he said, his tone firm. He pushed the old man again, a little harder than before, but this time something was different. The man didn't stumble or fall. Instead, he simply shifted his weight, and without even seeming to try, the leader found himself off balance, stumbling back a few steps. It was almost like the old man had somehow anticipated it, like he had been prepared for the push. The leader's eyes widened in surprise. "What the?" he muttered under his breath. The rest of the teens were just as shocked, their amusement quickly turning into confusion. The old man didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just straightened himself up again and continued walking. But now, there was a sense of authority in his movements. Something about him had changed. The teens could sense it, but they still didn't fully understand what was happening. They were starting to realize that they had underestimated him. It wasn't just the way he had moved. It was the way he carried himself, the way he held his ground. There was an aura about him, something unspoken, something that told them he wasn't someone they could mess with. The leader, still unsure of what to do, turned to his friends. "What's going on with him? He's moving like some kind of martial artist or something." The others looked at each other, uncertain. They hadn't expected the old man to be so capable. Some of them started to feel a little nervous, but the leader wasn't backing down. Not yet. He still wanted to see if he could get the old man to react, to show some weakness, to prove that he was still in control of the situation. But deep down, even he knew that something was different. They weren't in control anymore. The leader of the group, still unsure of what had just happened, stood there for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. He had pushed the old man, expecting the usual reaction. Someone who would fall or stumble, someone to mock and tease further. But the man had done something unexpected, something that none of them could explain. The teens exchanged uneasy glances, and for a brief second, a sense of hesitation began to creep in. But the leader wasn't one to back down easily. He had always been the one to control situations, to make others laugh at his jokes or taunts. The old man, despite everything, still seemed like an easy target, and he was determined to prove that he could get the reaction he wanted. He couldn't let this slip away, not in front of his friends. He took a step forward, his voice a little louder now, trying to provoke the man once again. "You're pretty strong for an old guy, huh? What's your secret?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Got a couple of tricks up your sleeve?" But the old man didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head to look at the teen. Instead, he just kept walking, slowly, as if he didn't hear a word. His face remained calm, unreadable, as if he wasn't even bothered by the taunts. This silence only seemed to frustrate the group even more. The leader, now irritated by the lack of reaction, stepped even closer. "Come on, show me what you've got," he challenged, feeling a sense of false bravado. He didn't expect to actually get any response, but he was determined to keep pushing the old man, to see if he could get the upper hand. That's when it happened. The old man, in one swift motion, turned to face the teen. It was so quick that the group barely had time to react. In an instant, the old man's hands were on the teen's wrist, locking it in a firm, controlled grip. It wasn't violent, but it was unmistakably strong. The leader froze, his eyes wide in shock. He tried to pull his arm back, but the old man's grip was steady, unyielding. Without saying a word, the old man gently twisted the teen's wrist, guiding him away from his body with a calm precision that left the leader no room to struggle. The teen stumbled backward, surprised by the old man's sudden strength. For a moment, it felt like the world had shifted. The old man wasn't just some harmless elderly person. He had done something that was both precise and powerful, with no wasted effort. The group of teens stood in stunned silence, watching in disbelief. They had expected to bully this man, to feel superior. But now, all they felt was confusion and awe. They had pushed him, mocked him, but he hadn't just defended himself. He had done so effortlessly, with an almost unnatural ease. The leader, still trying to regain his balance, rubbed his wrist, staring at the old man in a mix of surprise and awe. He had never expected this. He had seen a lot of things in his life, but this was different. This old man wasn't just walking down the street. He was a martial artist, someone who knew how to defend himself, someone who had the skills to put them in their place without even trying. "Who are you?" the leader finally asked, his voice quieter now. His tone was no longer mocking but filled with genuine curiosity. The old man looked at him for a moment, his face still calm, and for the first time during their encounter, he spoke. "I'm just a man who's seen much in his life," he said softly, "and I know the importance of respect." The words hit the group harder than any of the taunts had. There was a quiet wisdom in his voice that they hadn't expected. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an accusation. It was simply a statement, a reminder that respect, patience, and understanding were more important than their attempts at superiority. The silence that followed was heavy. The group of teens, still processing what had just happened, felt the weight of the old man's words more than anything else. The leader stepped back, his eyes still wide with disbelief. The others exchanged uncertain looks, some of them starting to feel the sting of guilt. They had underestimated this man. They had thought they could bully him, but instead, they had just learned a lesson they weren't ready for. The group stood in silence, the air around them heavy with uncertainty. The leader, still rubbing his wrist, couldn't believe what had just happened. His friends, who had been so confident just moments ago, were now looking at the old man with a mixture of confusion and awe. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the quiet street filling the gap. It was as if time had slowed down, and all the noise from the teasing and mocking had faded into nothing. The old man, meanwhile, didn't move a muscle. He simply stood there, his eyes calm, his body still, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. His earlier actions had been effortless, and it was clear that he was in control of the situation without even needing to prove it. It wasn't the kind of power that came from shouting or forceful movements. It was a quiet confidence, something that could only come from years of experience and wisdom. The leader finally spoke, his voice softer than before. What was that? How did you do that?" He was still trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The old man hadn't just defended himself. He had moved with such speed and precision that it left the teen speechless. He had expected a frail old man to be an easy target, but instead, he had encountered someone who was far beyond what he could imagine. The old man took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate but calm. "It's not about strength," he said in a quiet voice that carried far more weight than his words suggested. "It's about discipline, understanding when and how to act. Strength comes from knowing yourself and knowing when to control your impulses." The group remained still, absorbing his words, but it was clear that his message was sinking in. The leader, who had been so eager to prove himself earlier, now looked down at the ground, his face a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. He had thought that strength meant pushing others around, overpowering them with his words and actions. But now, the old man had shown him that true strength wasn't about domination. It was about control, patience, and respect. "I used to be a karate master," the old man continued, his voice steady and calm. "I spent years learning to control my body, my mind, my reactions. In martial arts, you learn not to fight unless it's necessary, and even then, you do so with respect." He paused for a moment, letting the words settle in the air before continuing. "What you all did today wasn't just disrespectful to me, but to yourselves as well." The leader's face flushed, his mind racing. He had always thought of himself as strong, powerful in his own way. But now, he saw how little he truly understood about strength. He had wasted his energy trying to bully someone who had been calm, collected, and in control the entire time. The old man's words hung in the air, and the teens, for the first time, felt a sense of shame creeping over them. They had underestimated him, mocked him, and tried to belittle him, all for no reason other than their own boredom. But now, they realized that they had learned something far more important than they had ever expected. One of the teens, a quiet boy who had stayed at the back of the group, looked up at the old man. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice sincere. The other teens, hearing his words, began to nod in agreement, their faces filled with regret. "We shouldn't have treated you like that." The old man smiled gently, his eyes softening. "Apologies are good, but actions speak louder than words," he replied. "It's not about what you say now, but about what you choose to do next. Respect is earned, and it starts with how you treat others." The leader, still processing the old man's words, took a deep breath. I think I understand now," he said, his voice quieter than before. "We were wrong. I was wrong." The others nodded, and for the first time, there was a sense of unity between them, a shared understanding of what they had done and what they needed to change. The old man gave them one last, knowing look before he turned to continue his walk. He didn't need to say anything more. His lesson had been learned. As he walked away, the teens stood there, reflecting on the encounter, knowing that they had just experienced something they would never forget. And for the first time in a long time, they felt a sense of humility, a quiet respect for the old man who had shown them the true meaning of strength. The teens stood in silence for a long time after the old man walked away. They had just been given a lesson they never expected. It wasn't the kind of lesson you could find in school, nor was it something you could learn from watching a YouTube video or reading a book. This lesson came from experience, from a man who had lived through countless years and learned more than they could imagine. The leader of the group, still feeling the weight of the old man's words, turned to look at his friends. He was surprised by how quiet they all were. Normally, after something like this, they would be laughing it off, trying to make jokes to brush off the awkwardness. But this time, it was different. Everyone was reflecting on the encounter, their minds spinning, trying to make sense of it all. I think we really messed up," the leader finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. He wasn't used to admitting when he was wrong, but something about today had changed him. "I mean, we just tried to bully that old man, and he turned out to be..." He paused, searching for the right words, but they didn't come easily. He had never really thought about strength the way the old man had shown them. It wasn't just about him being strong. One of the other teens spoke up, a girl who had been mostly quiet during the whole thing. It was about how he stayed calm, how he didn't let us get to him. We were all waiting for him to snap or fight back, but instead, he just showed us what true strength really is. The leader nodded slowly, still not quite sure what to make of everything. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Yeah, he didn't have to do anything crazy. He didn't shout, didn't get all angry like we expected. He just handled it. And then he taught us about respect, without even raising his voice. The girl who had spoken earlier looked down at the ground, reflecting on the man's words. He said that strength comes from knowing yourself, right? It's like he was teaching us that real power isn't about overpowering others or acting tough. It's about controlling yourself and knowing when to stand your ground. The leader was beginning to see things differently now. He thought about the times when he tried to prove himself to others, acting tough just to get laughs or attention. But he had never considered how hollow it felt until now. In that brief moment when the old man had disarmed him, the leader realized he wasn't as powerful as he once thought. His power had always come from making others feel small, but the old man's strength came from within. "I feel kind of embarrassed," another teen said, his voice small. He was one of the quieter ones in the group, but his face was flushed with regret. "We were all laughing, and I didn't think about how it might have made him feel. We were just treating him like an old man, like he didn't deserve respect. But we didn't know who he really was." The leader glanced at his friends, noticing for the first time the genuine remorse in their eyes. They were starting to understand, and he could feel it too. "I think we need to do better," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We need to treat people with respect, no matter who they are. No one deserves to be made fun of or bullied." One of the teens, the same girl who had spoken earlier, nodded in agreement. "It's about changing how we see people. Just because someone is older or different doesn't mean they're weak or easy to take advantage of." The old man showed us that. The leader felt a shift within himself. He had never realized just how much he had taken his own strength for granted. He had always assumed that his ability to make others laugh, to dominate the conversation, was the key to feeling powerful. But now he knew the truth. Strength wasn't about making others feel small. It was about lifting them up and earning their respect through actions, not words. The group stood in a reflective silence for a few more moments, each person quietly contemplating the impact of their encounter with the old man. They had learned a valuable lesson that would stick with them long after the day was over. It wasn't just about physical strength or who could shout the loudest. It was about respect, self-control, and understanding. As they began to walk away, the leader turned to look one last time in the direction the old man had gone. He hoped he would see him again someday, not to apologize, but to show that they had learned something meaningful. Today, the old man had not only taught them about strength, but about kindness, humility, and the importance of showing respect to everyone, regardless of age or appearance. "I think we'll be okay," the leader said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "We just need to remember this." In the days that followed their encounter with the old man, the group of teens began to change in ways they hadn't expected. The lesson they had learned wasn't one that could be easily forgotten. It wasn't just about physical strength or martial arts. It was about respect, about the way they saw others, and how they treated people who seemed different from themselves. At first, the leader felt a little unsure of how to go about it. He had always been the one to control situations, the one who spoke the loudest and made others follow his lead. But now he wasn't sure if that was the right way to act anymore. He had seen the way the old man had carried himself, the way he didn't need to assert dominance to be respected. The leader realized that there was a different kind of power, one that came from kindness, understanding, and the ability to stay calm in the face of adversity. As the days passed, he started making small changes. When he walked through school, he noticed how often people picked on others, whether it was a joke about someone's clothes or an offhand comment about someone's appearance. It was easy to let these things slide, to laugh along and join in, but now he saw them for what they were: hurtful, unnecessary, and unkind. One afternoon, he saw a younger student walking alone, head down, as a group of kids snickered and pointed at them from across the hallway. In the past, the leader would have just kept walking, maybe even joined in with the others. But now something inside him told him to do differently. He walked over to the group and stood between them and the student. "Hey, knock it off," he said firmly, surprising himself with the calm authority in his voice. The other kids looked at him, puzzled, and then walked away without another word. The student looked up, a little startled but thankful. The leader nodded at them, giving a small smile before he turned and walked off. It wasn't anything big, but for him, it was a shift. He wasn't just standing by and letting it happen anymore. The rest of the group of teens also started to change in subtle ways. The girl who had spoken up during their confrontation with the old man found herself thinking more about the way she treated others. She had always been the type to go along with the crowd, laughing at others' jokes just to fit in, but now she was beginning to feel uncomfortable with it. She noticed how easy it was to make someone feel small just by a careless comment. It wasn't something she wanted to be part of anymore. One day, after class, she approached a student who often sat alone in the cafeteria, a student who had always seemed a bit different from the others. She smiled and sat down beside them, starting a conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, and by the end of the lunch period, the student looked a little less lonely, a little more seen. It wasn't a big deal, but to the girl, it felt like an important step. The quieter members of the group, who had always kept to themselves, began to feel more comfortable speaking up. They were more willing to voice their opinions, to stand up when they saw something wrong, and even to help others who might need it. They began to realize that strength wasn't just about standing up for yourself. It was about standing up for others too. They all began to notice how their school and their neighborhood started to feel different. It was like a weight had been lifted, and the atmosphere around them had changed. People were kinder, more considerate, and more willing to help each other. It wasn't perfect, of course. Old habits were hard to break, and there were still moments of tension, but things were slowly improving. They all knew that the real work wasn't just in big gestures. It was in the small, everyday actions that built trust and respect. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way they looked at themselves. They no longer needed to put others down to feel better about themselves. They didn't need to be the loudest, the toughest, or the most popular. They understood now that real strength came from within, from being kind, understanding, and knowing when to be silent and listen. They didn't need to prove anything anymore. As the group walked home one afternoon, laughing together like they always had, the leader glanced around at his friends, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't just because they were all getting along, but because they had all grown, each in their own way. They had learned something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The lesson the old man had taught them wasn't just about fighting or winning. It was about living with honor and dignity. And for the first time, the leader truly understood what it meant to respect others. Weeks passed, and the changes within the group of teens became even more noticeable. They had learned a valuable lesson, one that had transformed their way of thinking and behaving. The lesson wasn't just something that lingered in the back of their minds. It had become a part of who they were. Their interactions with others had shifted, and it was clear that they were trying to make things right. They were learning to be more patient, more thoughtful, and more respectful. What had started as an embarrassing moment had turned into a real turning point in their lives. One afternoon, while walking through the park, the leader and his friends ran into the old man again. This time, there was no teasing, no tension, just a quiet, almost peaceful recognition between them. The old man looked up as they approached, and the group couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to radiate calmness. The leader felt a twinge of guilt in his chest, but this time, it wasn't the same kind of guilt as before. It wasn't the guilt of having done something wrong. It was the kind of guilt that comes from not having been able to show enough appreciation for someone who had helped them change. The old man smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, as if he could see the changes in them. The group, now feeling both nervous and grateful, approached him. The leader stepped forward, his voice sincere. We just wanted to say thank you," he said, his words carrying the weight of everything they had learned. "For what you taught us. We didn't understand it back then, but we do now." The old man nodded, not surprised by their words, but clearly pleased by their sincerity. "Sometimes, the greatest lessons come from the least expected places," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You've learned something important. Don't forget it." He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes gleaming with quiet pride. The teens nodded, each feeling a sense of deep gratitude. They had no idea how to express how much his actions had meant to them, how much his words had changed their perspective on life. But they didn't need to say more. He had already taught them the most important lesson of all: respect. The old man had shown them how to see strength not in dominance, but in kindness, patience, and the courage to remain calm when others tried to bring you down. As they walked away, the group felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The old man's words were with them, echoing in their minds. It wasn't just a lesson for them. It was a lesson for anyone who might need it. They had realized that every action, no matter how small, mattered. Even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. It wasn't about standing out or trying to impress anyone. It was about doing the right thing, no matter how difficult it seemed. From that day on, the teens found themselves looking out for one another more. helping others when they could, and standing up against anything that didn't feel right. It wasn't always easy, but they were determined to keep living by the lessons they had learned. They realized that true strength wasn't about showing off or proving something. It was about being humble, having integrity, and treating others with the respect they deserved. As the months went on, the group's reputation changed. They became known not for their teasing or for picking on others, but for their kindness, their willingness to help those in need. They didn't need to make a big show of it. They simply did what they knew was right. And slowly, others began to notice. People started looking up to them, not because they were the loudest or most popular, but because they had earned the respect of those around them. They had learned what it meant to truly be strong, and in doing so, they had become a positive influence in their community. The old man, whose name they never learned, had left a lasting impact on their lives. And while they never saw him again, his teachings stayed with them. They knew that no matter where life took them, they would always carry his lessons with them, lessons that had shaped them into better, more understanding people. It was the kind of wisdom that could change lives, and the group was forever grateful for the day their paths had crossed.